Okay, and there we go. And it's been a while since I've done this, but essentially, I guess we'll just go through roll call, right?
Yeah, just call the meeting to order at 6:04.
Okay, this is a meeting of the Board of Review of Lake County, and this meeting is called to order at now 6:05 p.m. I have.
Okay.
So what's forget the process to.
Well, right now, since we're Zooming, we generally say, Charlie, are you present at the meeting? And then you go, Luke, are you present at the meeting?
That's right. Okay. Well, I'll do everyone who's here. So let's start with Luke.
Okay.
Luke
Present.
Present. Ethan Kurt.
Present.
And Hope Collitz.
Present.
And I'm Cameron Millard. I'm the chair of the Board of Review. And I think we don't need to call attendance for folks who are not sitting members of the board, but just want to recognize John and Tim on the call, and Ann as well, and Paul Clarkson.
Recording in progress.
And maybe I'll suggest to folks, if you're not talking, to go ahead and mute. And
Who is? Oh, I saw
Sorry, I'm throwing a sneak on you. I just switched over to a computer instead of my phone here, so.
it. Okay.
Not
Rose
Rose
and
and Adele.
Yeah. Okay.
no worries. And we have an agenda. Not a whole lot is on it, but is there any new business that anyone would like to add to the agenda? And mostly we're just going to talk about an update about where we're at with adopting the new or newish 2018 codes.
Yeah, I'd still like to get some attention on the roofing permit that we approved to modify and add 2 questions to a couple of years ago. Never happened.
Hold on. Charlie's trying to get on, and I'm going to text him and tell him to look at the agenda.
And Charlie's texting me right now saying he's having some trouble. He's going to try a different computer.
No, he just needs to look at the agenda, because I think that
I'll send him an email with it too.
Okay. Well,
That's okay. That's the world we live in.
Yeah. I actually, there's some nice things about Zoom. It's convenient for us all, and it allows for anybody, if they want, to attend. And Hope's first comment here about her wanting the roofing permit to be amended. Hope we can talk about that as well, but I think I need to tell you all that I don't have anything to show you.
Well, Paul, it's I know you've been very busy. Would have permits tripled, quadrupled in the last year, something like that?
You saw the paper.
Yeah. So totally understand. It's a lot to deal with. And I had hoped personally to, start drafting a new ordinance. But I realized that I've misplaced my notes, which weren't very good to begin with. So I remember a few things that we discussed over the many meetings of things that we wanted to change. For example, we had a conversation about windows and how the 2021 code actually allows us to not require such a stringent U value. Remember that conversation? Because, at altitude, and for whatever reason, I think Luke had mentioned this too, it's hard to meet that code. So that was one thing. It seemed like there was things about sprinklers and lots of little details that had come up, but without documentation of those discussions, we're gonna have a hard time crafting this resolution.
Well, I have notes as well, and let's go back to that window U factor. Is the U factor in the 18 code a U30 or is it a 32? Luke?
If I remember, it went down to a 30 and then the 2021 goes back to a 32.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
That's what
to
I
you?
recall as well.
Yeah,
That's correct.
12 is a 30, but our resolution in 12 was 32.
And what was the other one you just mentioned, Kim?
Sprinklers.
sprinklers was a topic I recall. I can't remember what we.
Well, I think
there.
for 1 and 2 family dwellings, the IRC, in fact, that would also be townhouses too. Is that right, Ann?
That's correct.
Okay, so I think we don't want to require sprinklers in 1, 2, and townhouses.
It
Is that-
sounds like it was too onerous. It was
Well,
too much cost and not necessarily providing that much of a benefit. And wasn't our fire marshal okay with it?
The only
I
thing that I know about that I just want to interject a little bit is that I think in some previous discussions, based on the square footage of the home and the location, there might need to be a secondary water source, water supply, like a buried cistern or something like that. So if you forego sprinklers in certain areas, there needs to be consideration. I know that there was a discussion on that of having a secondary water supply present on new construction.
Yeah, I think that's specific to a subdivision procedure. Have we required secondary water supply on a single family home?
Well, that was the discussion that the fire department, the fire marshal, and I believe the fire chief wanted to have contemplated within this new adoption is the possibility of that building permit on a certain threshold and certain geographic locations where a secondary water supply might be needed if sprinkling isn't required.
I think that's an IFC requirement.
And
And
then we don't deal with that,
Well,
right?
but we're not IFC for residential.
Yeah.
Right.
I wonder if that's something that just needs to be something that the fire department's looking at on their sign-offs on a case-by-case basis.
Would it not, however, need to be in, I guess, in the resolution for the adoption? I guess it only speaks to the areas of the IRC or the IBC, and everything else is done by reference. So quite possibly that makes sense, Luke.
Hope you got something?
I have a question. Are we going to just spend our time this evening trying to remember certain things, or are we going to formulate a plan to complete this, like go through the agenda again, or what's our plan?
well, our plan is to talk about the code and the fact that we're kind of nowhere. So I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking of doing. Are you all for that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I might have enough money in my budget to ask Colorado Code Consulting, who is now Shums Coda, to help us with a new resolution. And it'll be kind of based on the old one, but I'm taking notes here about what the changes that we remember talking about, and see if we can get a code adopted by the end of the year. And I
So
think
Does that mean that's not our involvement, or what is our involvement with that if we hand it over to, what's the name of the new code consulting company?
Shums Coda.
Shops Coda.
No, Shum, S-H-U-M, Shums Coda. No, and the process would be that you as a board would recommend, well, we'd talk about making amendments to what Shum's Coda comes up with, but it would not go on to the Board of County Commissioners until you pass on it.
Paul, and the rest of the board, I like that idea. I've personally sat down with the old resolution and kind of banged my head against my computer for a little while and thought, this is a difficult, time-consuming task to craft a new resolution. I mean, it goes beyond just cutting and pasting. It takes a detailed knowledge of specific changes and, many of the things that we had previously discussed. And, I just didn't feel up for it personally. So I think, paying someone to craft it and then we can review it. And at least we have a working document at that point. And, folks on the board who've taken notes, and maybe my notes will turn up at some point, I hope. Maybe that would be our opportunity to make those changes to those amendments or add amendments. But I mean, there's a lot of little sticky points about, in the resolution, there are little changes that are needed, little tweaks to better reflect, the reality of our code here locally. So I'm personally in favor of that idea. I think if you're able to do that and afford it, that'll move things forward faster than probably we can do if we just try and tackle it as a group, because I think we're all maxed out.
I would like to go through some things that we all remember. And Dan Wood has done this a couple of times. So I think that we can probably ask him. Did you hear that?
Who's Dan Wood?
Dan Weed. He has served as he's a principal of Colorado Code Consulting, a Shum's Coda company. But he has also served as a substitute inspector and plan reviewer for several years, off and on. He has written the code for, I think, Cripple Creek, the 2018 code for Cripple Creek. I know he's done it for, what's the name? The Trinidad. And I think he's done it for a couple of counties as well.
And you're saying he has working knowledge of our community and our
done
inspections here. Yeah.
I think he does. Yes.
Yeah.
So what I would like to be able to do tonight, if you are all amenable, and I've already started doing that, is take quick notes on things that we all remember needed to be addressed, and talk about we'll just see what we can remember, and then go from there.
Cameron, do you mind if I just ask a couple quick questions? And so the other thing I would just offer is that I would definitely think Dan would be an excellent resource. He recently helped me as we're getting ready to create the backcountry zoning, looking at a way in which to permit backcountry structures, and his input and guidance really helped, within a short amount of time, something that I've been looking at for several years, we were able to do really quickly. And so I think that he, and I think probably a lot of you are really familiar with him. You may have had him as your inspector when he was our fill-in between Gary and Jerry. So, he is really familiar with our area, and he did a lot of plan reviews for us as well. So I think that he would be an excellent resource. And then I just wanted to kind of remember, was there a presentation given to the Board of Review about the significant changes between the 12 and the 18? So you kind of have an idea of that. You've already been given that information, right? And then, and so it's just, so your target points are looking at those changes, as well as maybe changes that you currently want to make to the existing resolution, because like you said, Cameron, there's, you've identified, and Luke, I think you've all, and maybe you as well, Hope, have all identified different ways that we need to strengthen that resolution, as well as practices within the office. So those are kind of your high points. I'm just trying to bring myself up to speed because I apologize. I've missed a few of these.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
okay. I believe it was Jerry Long who gave us a nice presentation that came from Colorado Code Consulting. And on my computer, I have one that identifies just the IBC. So we've gone through the IBC and then the IRC, both. And for some reason, I can't find the IRC presentation. But I do recall us going through both of those with Jerry. So maybe he can resend those and share them with the commissioners or the rest of the board. But the IBC one, for example, it's 50 pages of notes. So
Yes.
to get into it would be pretty time consuming, and that's what we spend many of those meetings on.
All right, so what I'd like to do right now, if it's okay with you, is see what you guys recall about the energy code. I believe state statute requires us to adopt the whole thing and not amend it.
It does.
I don't know if it means we can't amend it. I just think that we can't diminish it.
Yeah, we can make it more stringent, which I doubt that's the goal here, but yeah.
And the whole thing with the windows was that the 2021 code kind of does that. So remember, that was Hope Medina who shared that with us, that she thought it would be acceptable for us to just kind of bring whatever is in the 2021, whatever language is in 2021 to.
What's the enforcement potential for that? I mean, is our building is Paul going to get carried off if we don't throw him in jail? I mean,
Hi, Charlie. And hey, Charlie, just for the record. So Charlie Benny, can you, I guess you're present now at the meeting. Thanks
I don't
for,
think that's Charlie.
is that not
Yeah, that's
Charlie?
that's
Oh,
me. Yeah.
And I need to find my charger. Charlie, the enforcement mechanism is that the county can lose FEMA funding and grant monies and other significant resources from the state. So no one's going to come and put Paul in jail, but our community could stand to lose on fire mitigation or disaster relief. There's real teeth in that statute. And so we had agreed at that time that, we better honor the legislation.
Yeah, it's been 2 years since
Yeah.
those meetings all occurred. So it's,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of bringing myself up to speed. But Paul and I had a quick discussion a while back, discussing who's in what jurisdictions have adopted it and what the reality is about that. Realistically, I think we could craft a good process for that doesn't require pass fail on the part of Joe homeowner is not going to pass.
Tell me if I'm
Will,
wrong, Charlie. I think what Charlie's saying, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that when it comes down to enforcing some of these energy codes, especially the air changes per hour. So that Joe homeowner who's building his house and has 5 air changes per hour, and his house is done and built, and who's going to be that strong arm that's going to say, no, your house is not going to get a CO?
And
Is that am I on the right track, Charlie?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
What? And my question is, why should that be different than any other failure to meet the code?
Yeah, what if they failed something else? I mean, it's the same
What if
concept.
their structural
Well-
integrity is bad and they're.
Well, that's a little different.
That's
Nobody's ever held our feet to the fire and told us we have to make a house a plastic bag.
And I'll point again and
then
remind
put in an air
Charlie.
exchanger
Yeah.
that costs $10,000 and
Well, that's
spend
not true, Charlie.
$5,000
That's not
on
true.
air sealing and
Yeah,
all
so
this
That's
other
not
stuff.
true. And then we
So-
don't need to do that. Say the worst.
I do all these things. I
yeah,
already do these things.
Charlie
but
already
I'm
does
just
them.
saying.
He does a really great house and it's energy efficient and well ventilated. And that's what's so critical, I think, to understand with the interaction between air tightness and also the mechanical ventilation, which has also been ignored or exempted in our previous resolution. We just scratch any kind of ventilation issue. And so your houses can range the gamut from being super leaky, so lots of fresh air is coming in, and that can be okay for indoor occupant health. And they don't have to worry about ventilating too much because they're just naturally ventilating. To having an extremely airtight house with like a plastic bag, like you said, Charlie, and without the mechanical ventilation understanding, that can be actually dangerous and harmful to the occupants. So, the air tightness testing is what tells you whether your house, is airtight like a plastic bag or way too leaky or some happy medium. And it actually, if you do the ventilation calculations correctly, you can credit for a little bit of infiltration. So you have a little bit of leakage. It's pretty hard to make it extremely airtight. And then the calculator will say, okay, you've got a little air leakage, and then you need this much ventilation. And that's really a best practice. But the codes are tightening up in the way that they're recognizing the deleterious effects of not testing. So, it's all about control of your enclosure. And I'm sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox, I know here. But, we don't build a leaky roof because we want to have a little moisture in the house. So we shouldn't build a leaky envelope because we want to have a little ventilation. We
Plus,
should
there's
control
more,
it.
yeah, and there's more than one way to solve that problem. It's not
Yeah.
always the most expensive solution. And Cameron can attest that there are several strategies
And
with things that
Hope
are
has
already
a
existing in the
Hope
home.
has a very low cost strategy called the poor man's HRV. It's a passive air inlet. It works in conjunction with your exhaust fans. I've come around. I'm a believer in this system because it doesn't really add to the cost of the construction. So
Yeah, there are things you're
What's the
already.
difference between that and a leaky window?
well, it's yeah, you can always open a window, but the passive vent will always be there, and it's engineered to provide the right airflow, the right balance. So
What I
Yeah.
remember talking about when we were talking about this is not waiting until we get to final building to have a blower door test.
yeah.
And what that would mean is we do it at framing. Is that right?
Well, you can't
Yeah.
always do it at framing. It depends on how the building is proceeding. So if, for example, if you don't have drywall in your ceiling, and your ceiling is your air barrier in a lot of cases, then you can't do a blower door test. So you basically have to have at least a rudimentary level of enclosure before you can blower door test.
So
But-
would that mean doing it at a drywall inspection?
It could work at a drywall inspection. And the thing is, if it's done at drywall instead of at final, there's still an opportunity to do some air sealing. Once trim is up, your air sealing measures are limited. But if
Like
your
caulking.
drywall is up, then you still have access to a lot of those rough openings, to the penetrations, to the vent, the fans, the fan housing, the LED light openings, and you can effectively air seal. But yeah, if you wait till you're spick and span, then you're in a retrofit situation. And I'm sure Commissioner Fiedler wouldn't mind me saying this, but he has a brand new house and it was leakier than he would have liked. And he had a company come in and seal it up and made it tight after he was already living in it for a year. So
Yeah. There's
you
a
know.
lot of known offenders you can tackle in the combustion rooms and things like that around plumbing, around.
yeah.
There's a lot of known offenders to clean it up and cinch it out.
So we could do a blower test at drywall inspection.
Yes.
And weren't we talking about doing another one at final building?
Here's the messaging that you could give out. You only need one blower door test that is compliant with the code, right? And that can happen whenever you choose. But if you're a first-time home builder, or you're a builder who hasn't had a blower door test on your buildings, and you're not sure how tight or leaky your buildings are, then you should do it as soon as possible. You should do 2 blower doors and figure out if you have air leaks before it's too late to correct that cost effectively. So that's just messaging that you could put out. I think it would be wrong to require it at a certain rough-in stage, because that looks different for every home. And the, you know, the build, the progress and the sequencing looks different for every builder and every home. So you
Seems to
can't
be
tell them
much-
when to do it, but you could strongly encourage people and let them know, give them a heads up that, hey, you've got to meet 3 ACH 50. If you don't know what this is about, then, you know, get 2 blower door tests. You know, they're very affordable still, and we still have a number of people in this community who offer them, and it would help their businesses, frankly. I'm not one of those people, so I'm out of that business, but I would, you know, I would like to see the other businesses that offer blower door testing get to be involved, and that's helpful, I think, for everybody.
Okay, so we recommend that the blower door test be done at its earliest possible time,
Yes.
but it has to be done by final building. Okay, so what if somebody goes ahead and waits till final building?
Then they're
And it
rolling the
fails.
dice a little bit.
Well, and it fails. Do we
Then
fail?
they have to fix it, you know, like Jeff Fiedler did, like Commissioner Fiedler did. His house wouldn't have failed, but he wanted to build a very energy efficient house, and he was unsatisfied with the amount of air leaks. And so he had it remedied. But
Paul, there's a lot of trades that install things to meet code that aren't airtight, and mainly the HVAC. If there's ducts, you know, the furnace flues going through the walls, all that, water pipes, a lot of people skip all that. They don't foam it. And that eats up a lot, you know. Plus, once you do a blower door, you can run around with an infrared camera and find out exactly where the hemorrhaging is, if it's, you know, a big leak.
I have actually experienced that with Cam. 6
Yeah.
years ago, Cam.
yeah. Yeah.
And I was blown away. There was air leaks at light fixtures. There was air leaks in places that I never thought there'd ever be one.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that new homes are being built today that are, you know, not substantially better than a home that was built in the, you know, earlier part of the last century in terms of air leakage. You know, we should know better. We should do better. We should demand better. And our climate here is very punishing, and the impacts of air leakage are really costing our community in terms of energy expenditures annually. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
I mean, $100 a month difference, almost, not exactly, but putting that R5 over the exterior, right? You're saving a huge amount of heating costs monthly, up to $100 I've seen.
Hope, what that R5
Continuous.
continuous, is that just Tyvek?
No, R5
Rigid.
board continuous, and R5 insulation. It stops the thermal bridging, and it stops a lot of the air leakage.
She's
And
just
all those
bringing it
brilliant
up because it shows that the code is saving people money and making our buildings better, you know,
Right.
and this is not something that Hope or I have invented. This is where the building industry is going based on what's the best way to build a building.
We
know?
know that, Cam. It's just that I find it interesting that the building code, 75% of the building code had some kind of a fire relationship to it.
Yeah.
Now the building code is extending itself into other areas. I don't think I object, but I also know that the state does not require us to have a building code. But if we do, the state is starting to make additional requirements on us.
Yeah.
And I have to say that I do find that a little bit objectionable. I'd like to have a building code, but I'd like to be able to have it so that we all like it. But the state is now requiring us to not significantly amend the IECC unless it complies with, say, the 2021. So I
have to afford to live in their house, Paul. That's the problem. It's that if we build these homes, it's getting temperatures are getting more drastic in each direction. And that's why these codes are put in, these energy codes are put into place, because people can then afford to live in the home.
Okay,
No.
I get that, and I don't disagree with it. But the way I'm looking at it now is that it's a fact. We're gonna have to do it when we adopt the code. So,
I would just like to point out, my big issue with all this is that I feel like the energy code and the mechanical ventilation are about the most ambiguous parts of the code. And we just need to brace ourselves, because I think there is going to be a little bit of a something storm.
What's ambiguous about it?
Blower door testing, knowing when to test. I mean, we're asking that every homeowner, builder, every builder coming to town, educate themselves on proper air sealing. So when they get to the end of a job and they do their blower door, they don't fail.
Yeah.
There's a lot more demands of education and building science. And then when you get into mechanical ventilation too,
But there
than
was
there's
a lot
ever
of
been in the codes.
education that we came from the 30s to now that we learned, we had to educate ourselves on. A lot of fire education on how not to burn down buildings in 5 minutes, right?
yeah,
We learned a
I-
lot of time. And
I
then
don't thi-
It's
I
not
don't
as
think-
ambiguous, that's all. You can read the code.
Yeah.
And
I don't
and
think
pretty well walk through it.
I don't think Luke is trying to talk us out of it. I think he's just simply making a point that, and I actually agree with that point, because here we are making the building tighter, and now we're getting so tight, potentially so tight, that we have to introduce additional mechanical venting. And I think there's going to be some pushback on that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
totally understood. We're not gonna kid ourselves and say that this doesn't have an impact on folks and their building processes. It's gonna require some changes. I've seen the buildings evolve over the years. They're getting more. The materials are getting more sophisticated. The techniques are getting more sophisticated. It's just an evolution. We don't drive cars with the same technology from like 1970. So it's, and mechanics will complain that these computers are annoying to deal with in your car, and cars are not the same
we all have
anymore.
to evolve.
Yeah.
But as far as the ambiguity, the beautiful thing about testing and measurement is there is no ambiguity. It's a measurement that can be taken. And I've found that in the building industry, so much of it rests on sort of folk knowledge, like, hey, this is how we've always done it, without, clear insight. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, to me, that's ambiguity is, my predecessors did it this way, so I'll do it this way. I really like testing and measurement and verification because it's not ambiguous, but with relationship to the ventilation and the air tightness, the code doesn't tell you the best way to do it. That's for sure. And, let's just keep in mind that the code is the bare minimum that you have to do for the law. And if you want to build a really amazing home, you're going to do what Charlie does and put in heat recovery ventilators that provide conditioned, high quality air to the occupants. And once you've lived in a home has great ventilation and great energy performance, as I live in one, I would never go back. I love it. And, it's the way a house should be built if you care about building a house. So there will be those naysayers, and they'll grumble, and they basically want to just keep building a house the way they've been doing it. But, it can be a differentiator for your quality builders who take the time to understand and invest in their own knowledge, as KW has done, because they've participated in my classes in the past, and as Charlie is doing, and other companies. So, we have some high performance builders here, and let's praise them and encourage them and codify the best practices that they're already doing. That's what
All right. Well, I think in a lot of ways here, in most ways here, we don't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a mute
and
point
so-
anyway.
So.
We could choose
um,
not to do anything and we would just keep with the status quo, but in my mind, that would be a real tragedy because, you know, there's a whole wide variety of quality when it comes to energy performance that we're currently permitting.
And part of our job here is to help and support the people of Lake County as well as the contractors, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I'm gonna just interrupt real quick. I've had my hand raised for a long time, so I'm gonna jump in.
Sorry.
real quick.
Oh, I see it now. Sorry, Annie.
It's all right. Yeah, and to what all of you are saying, I think that's really good, but I think that, and absolutely agree. I just really want to make everybody very cognizant of how many self-builds that we process annually. And that in adopting this code, there needs to be a very intentional a series of resources available to not only our contractors, but readily available for self-builds. You know, eventually I'd love to talk to everybody, not tonight, but about some testing standards in order to be able to pull building permits, but to try to kind of raise the bar a little bit. But I just really think as you're thinking about all of these things, we as staff really need to make sure that we're getting resources and educational opportunities out to make sure that these are successful, because, you know, I hear all of this and they're great points, but we need to be able to give the tools to the industry so that this code is manageable, because it is going to be, you know, it's going to be a significant change. And we would hate to see somebody getting to final inspection and having to go back and do timely and costly modifications had they had the education and ability to do this up front. So just please make sure that, you know, we're thinking about that part of it to help shepherd people in this community into these best practices if that's what's decided by the board.
Well,
She's
I-
gonna make,
Totally.
she's gonna make a great building official, don't you think?
Well, I just want to jump in and tell you for the past 4 years, I've been running a training and testing center on this here, and I train all the weatherization staff for the state of Colorado. So we do have resources. I also do quarterly trainings for Energy Smart. We do have the resources. I've offered them for years. I've just never been called for them.
Well, Annie, to your point
I'd
too,
love to have that information in the office. I'd love to have
Yeah.
you provide me that information because
Yeah, let's-
I was unaware of that.
yeah, let's get some information and, you know, I remember we had a discussion as a board about homeowner builders and how challenging they can be. And I remember Jerry was really frustrated and wanted to actually eliminate. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think Jerry wanted us to get rid of, you know, owner builders altogether. Of course, I wouldn't agree with that. Being an owner builder myself, it was a great process and I really got a lot out of it and I thought it was amazing. But I've like, you know, I've been involved actually in a number of owner builders, most recent being my neighbor out here in Sylvan Lakes. And he was going down the wrong path until I got involved. A very leaky log cabin and electric baseboard. And he got his first heating bill and it was $600 in October, I think, of last year. And he was blown away. He said, why is my bill $600? So I came in, we did the blower door. We found that his house was really leaky. He did some air sealing. He made some changes and he got back on the right path. So I actually think that this requirement will be ultimately advantageous because it will protect the owner builder from going down like a really crappy path of, you know, just building a super leaky house, because that's what ends up happening. So if we can get professionals like Hope involved, you know, other people who can intervene early and let people know you're heading down a dangerous, you know, costly path here. Because the real cost is not the upfront cost of air sealing, it's the long-term consequences of their energy bills.
All right, I would like to move on. Anybody object?
I object. I think there should be some kind of discussion or thought process on when like the final blower door should happen, or Cameron mentioned it, like they can do it whenever, but should there be some kind of guidance, like, you know, after mechanicals have moved through and MAPS in particular, or more generally, just because something could be tight and get a lot leakier?
Ethan, the code does reference the ANSI standards for blower door testing, and the final test should come after all penetrations have been made. So
Okay.
you can't do, you're not supposed to do the test and then punch holes in the
Right,
in
yeah,
the envelope.
because the HVAC's part of the envelope too, so it should be included in the blower door.
But realistically, this testing is going to be done by a third party, and if that third party is a qualified person with training, then they're going to address those issues. So when I used to go in and test, I would look at that and be like, are you at the right point in your build to get this final, when it's for compliance, right?
It doesn't have to be third party though, does it, Kim?
No, it doesn't.
So Charlie
We did
Could
have
get
a conversation.
could get certified in, or KW could do their own, could they not?
It's true, but the cost of certification or training alone is thousands of dollars, and then the equipment is thousands of dollars. So you're a lot better off just paying, someone with a blower door $200 or whatever they charge, unless you're building dozens and dozens of homes. But yeah, most builders are not going to do that. I know Ethan has a blower door, and
Yeah,
I think he
builders-
uses it all the time.
I have a
his own
blower door.
building,
It's easy to train. The city could have one that they could do for a tool rental. And the building department can have a blower door and do a tool rental. I mean, there's ways to make it accessible, but yeah, it doesn't take much to learn how to operate one. And a lot of developers and builders might have someone on staff that's trained, and they just go around and do homes. They can do other businesses blower door tests as well.
So does that answer your question, Ethan? It's not
Yeah.
clear as to when it can be done. But it
And
kind of you probably need to do it as early as you can.
If
As
you're
an
unfamiliar,
education
test
program.
early, test often, but for compliance, there is a standard around when it's supposed to be done, and that's after you've punched all the holes in the building.
I have a question from an administrative sort of standpoint. Are we going to require that the county receives the results of every blower door test? Are they going to be
Yeah.
logged exactly the same as the inspection records for everything else?
Yeah, there will be a report,
Sure.
and that's gonna have to happen. We're gonna have, and if it fails the blower door test, we can't give them a CO.
Before we move on from that topic, I would just like to tag on to what Ann said. I think that was really well put. And in addition to that, I would be really uncomfortable moving into the new codes before we have something really in place that spells out that process for people. I think before we ever move into 2018, we need to have some sort of education in place. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, who comes up with that, how it's presented, but something that's totally in your face. So when you go to pull a permit, that shows you how that needs to go down, just so that we avoid this issue we're talking about in the end.
I think
On the
it's gonna
inspection
be,
card as well?
I think, Luke, it's gonna be inevitable that we're gonna find some enforcement problems with this, whatever we do. I think we can head a lot of that off with what Ann talked about, with what you're talking about, but we're not going to be able to head it all off. And it's probably going to be mostly with homeowner builders.
I do think that we as staff, John and myself, assisting Paul, we could at least engage with like Hope offline, Cameron, anyone that has kind of the keys to giving us some guidance in doing some prepared information and resource gathering, and we could bring that back to the next Board of Review meeting just as an action point, so that we can go try and gather some of that information and talk to each of you offline, put that together and bring that back to the board for the next meeting, if that would be helpful.
I don't want to delay adopting the code for more education, which I think has some practicality to it, but I think I really am feeling kind of anxious about getting the code adopted.
And here's something that could help you guys. Energy Star thermal bypass checklist. You guys could, make that available either through an electronic link or print it off or tell people to print it. This is a checklist that you hand to people, and it's a step-by-step guide to air sealing, and avoiding big air leaks as you're building. So that resource is out there, and it's super helpful, and people can reference it, and it's free, and it has nice pictures. And
it's the Energy Star thermal bypass checklist.
yes.
That okay?
Yep. It's government, government at work, but it's from DOE. They did a nice job with it, and it's been around for years and years.
We'll
All
still,
And I'd love to see if Hope from Shums Coda has some resources on hand she could send our way that we can just include with everything that would really spell it out for people.
yeah, we'll try to be as fluid as we can about getting this. We're not trying to delay it, but I just think it's an incredibly important piece. So Paul, I think John and I can probably, I have a teeny tiny bit of time, but I think this is super important. So I will use what I have to work towards this too.
So do we have a vote here to make Ann the building official? I think she'd make a great building official.
It sounds like that could be in the works, Paul, but
Yeah, it could be.
before we move on, let's Hope Collins had something real quick.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Okay.
Well, speaking of moving on, Hope Collins, can you talk to us about your roofing circumstance?
Well, it's Colitz, but actually, so the last meeting or two meetings before that, I proposed 2 sentences to be added to the roofing permit because of a result of 3 people getting very ill and almost getting, dying if they tightened their house. We talked about that through roofer negligence. And because the permit, our inspectors only inspect what the roofer tells them to inspect, there's no actual safety whatsoever. And this apparently has happened a few times in homes. So my questions are, the first question is, does the home have natural drafting combustion appliances? The second question is, do they vent through the roof? Period. What that does is that makes any roofer or any contractor who doesn't know what they're doing check to see if the furnace and the water heater, after they rip down a chimney to put on a metal roof, actually vented through that. Because remember, the roofer decided, since they didn't have a fireplace, he convinced the homeowner that they could just tear down the chimney, never investigating what had to do with the water heater or the furnace. And that was venting.
Okay, so I hope you're not talking so much about code as much as you're talking about requiring us to ask these questions when a roofing permit comes in.
Yeah, 2 sentences on a roofing permit. We had a vote last time and everybody voted yes. Does anybody recall this, or am I just the only one that recalls this?
I can't answer that.
But there's no consequence. And we went back and forth. Jerry said it was the homeowner's fault, 7-year-old woman who knows nothing about how homes are built. And the roofer said, well, she told me to rip it down after he told her she didn't need it. So there's got to be some kind of question, a safety thing, that these people don't die in their house. CO is a big issue. And if you chop down a chimney that the furnace and the water heater are venting out of and put a roof over, it's just going to come back in the house and eventually one day kill somebody. We got lucky here.
And I've personally seen this at least twice, not just in this community, but in other communities as well.
So it's a hole in our code.
Yeah. Well,
or in our
like,
inspection process.
Hope's got a good, if you ask that question, then it causes somebody to look. And we're not trying to change code or even add enforcement. We just want people to look at it. So there is
awareness.
awareness.
It just says, hey, you're not required to have a contractor license to do this. You're not required to have anything except for insurance. So maybe that's a thought process that they don't think about.
Okay, well, I think it won't take much to actually put these two questions with check mark boxes next to them on the actual roofing permit.
Yeah, we just took those down, Hope, John and I did, and so we can easily modify that. Thank you for those.
That would be a good benefit for their community. Thank you.
Could be a lifesaver.
Mhm.
So, yeah, actually, this is a hole in our inspection process. And not a very big hole, but it doesn't, because it doesn't happen very often. But if it happens once, it's too often. So can we move on to
Paul, just to interject, we aren't holding another vote. You guys already voted on this and it's considered done.
we're not voting yet. We're discussing. This is a work session.
And it sounds like we don't necessarily even need to vote. It sounds like your staff in the building department is willing to make this change, and
Yeah.
sounded like Ann just agreed to do it. So it sounds like we've found a resolution to the issue.
So what else do you all recall regarding amendments to the 2018 code?
So
There were
Paul,
so many. There were so many. There was stuff about railings and balconies and sorry, go ahead, Luke.
yeah, sorry. So I do have a lot of notes that I wrote on the old resolution amendment. I guess the biggest question I have though is when Dan Weed, I believe, is going through this, is he starting from scratch? Is that what we probably need at this point?
No, he probably won't start from scratch.
Okay.
He, and like I said, he has been an inspector and a code writer and a plan reviewer for, I think 30 years. And Colorado Code Consulting has a lot of resources for these kinds of things. So I think that the 2018 codes that they've put together so far are probably what we're looking for. But I think I recall railing post distances. I think we were talking about a baby's head, because I think that our code says it's 4 inches and IRC says 3 or
No,
5.
the code says 4 and our code says 6. And it's really so that we can shove snow out of there without getting hung up on 4 inches. And I can't remember if we decided to keep that at the 6 we've had or switch it to the code recommended 4.
You can still get snow through the code recommended 4, can't you?
Yeah, just when you have 12 inches of snow, that's a little harder, I think. And I wasn't there for the original change on that, so I don't necessarily have that argument down, but the other one that we talked about, and I think we were going to leave alone, is the rise and run requirements for stair treads. So we have a little more leeway on that with our own resolution, and I think we were going to keep that where it's at, which is a 8 and 9 inch.
I recall
Okay.
that as well.
I do recall that. And I do recall us deciding to keep it as it is.
Even though Jerry suggested otherwise, yeah.
Okay.
Something I just popped into my head. I don't know if this is necessarily code resolution, but we talked about nixing drywall fastening inspections, except for I think like cement board and like tub surrounds and stuff like that.
So isn't that what a drywall inspection is intended to do, is just check the fastenings?
I'm trying to rack my brain now whether that was it or well, I mean, now the inspection is for all drywall, even cement board included. But there was,
We talked about square footage, right? You don't, not requiring it for a certain square footage less than.
no,
I think
we talked about
that's a
just
separate.
mixing drywall altogether. Drywall fastening
that-
inspection, unless it's a fire rated
inspection.
Ooh, that
Well,
that doesn't seem smart though.
I would
Why would
also
you-
say that could be a good time to do a blower door test.
Don't mix drywall and blower door. These are two separate topics. And yeah.
I think this was something that Jerry brought up, and maybe it deserves further research, but I think he wasn't overly concerned about seeing the drywall screws. I think when you're talking multifamily or commercial, anytime where there's fire rated walls, and they would certainly have to be seen, because you can't go hiding that fire rating either. But in a residential situation and not around a shower, it's a huge upset as far as the construction flow goes. Just because you've got your drywall crew in, and then you're losing a day while they're checking screws. So I think that was the logic there, but I'm fine to discuss that more.
Jobs I've done is I've redone people's drywalls. I'm not going to say the contractor, but a contractor in town. I keep getting hired to refix his work. And drywall is one of the major problems. He uses 3 or 4 screws for a sheet.
I mean, maybe Dan Weed would have input on this, but yeah, I don't recall this conversation, and it seems like that's an important inspection in my humble opinion.
I actually have wondered myself, is it truly an important inspection? So
I'm repairing a lot of drywall around town.
I will ask Dan. Anything else?
Related to the inspection card, adding a separate line item for shear wall inspections. That was something we discussed.
Can you try to remind us?
Well, I mean, basically, Jerry will say he doesn't need to inspect sheathing nailing patterns. Maybe this is going back to homeowner builders. But if there's specific shear walls called out in the plans, he needs to see those because it's a structural concern, right? But if not, it's not something he's looking at. I think that was the gist of it.
I don't recall him talking to us about it very much. Even when he brings inspections in, he doesn't talk to us about a problem with a shear wall.
I mean, with all due respect, I'm not sure Jerry is looking that much at the structural components the way that he needs to be in shear walls in that category.
Okay, so you, Luke, do recall us having this conversation?
I do, yeah. I believe it's something that Dan Northcraft brought up. And I think it's coming to play more with exterior foam. Because it's harder to time that just right when you're adding exterior foam.
Okay.
I think it would come into play a lot more with a different inspector. So if we were talking about Jerry for the rest of our lives, then I don't think we'd ever need to see a separate shear wall inspection. But another inspector who's maybe more savvy on the structural side of things would probably want to see that. So I think it would have value being written into this resolution or into our
discussion
checklist.
we've had continuously is like, we're not catering this to any one inspector, right? We're trying to make this bulletproof.
No, I agree. And yes, I agree with those comments. I understand those comments about Jerry. I don't think he's long for us. Because I think that he probably wants to get out eventually. So this isn't going to be something that this is going to be something that we're going to want to have in our future. And yes, the resolution should add this in because we do have a section of the resolution that lists the inspections that need to be done.
Here, let's just think about this for a sec. So on most any of this, we can get a partial inspection, and on a bigger project, you're almost always going to have partial framing inspections that just check off certain things that you need to get inspected sooner than later. Is there a reason that if someone needed to get their shear walls inspected before the rest of their framing inspection, they couldn't call for a partial framing?
I've done that.
I don't see why not. I mean, I know we do partial framings. Jerry has brought in partial frame inspection reports.
Yeah, and there's maybe not a lot, but there's scenarios where the shear walls will be covered up like during framing.
Right. I feel like that's a valid way to cover it. And then I'm just afraid that if we put that shear wall inspection as its own, it might throw some people off to think that that's some other strange timing thing they have to pay attention to. And they just have to verify that it's inspected and not covered up at some point, along with the framing inspection.
So should we start talking about making a list of what gets inspected at framing?
Oof, that's a long list.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I can read it off the resolution. It talks about the sheathing and bracing. So that speaks to some of that.
Off our current resolution.
Yeah, on Appendix D.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
we might be pretty well covered there anyway.
Okay.
One other inspection that I believe we're going to get rid of is concrete slabs, underfloor reinforcement, unless it's a structural slab. And I don't know exactly who brought that up, but that's something I had crossed out here.
I don't think we generally inspect for flat work.
Yeah, I already thought we didn't. In fact, Jerry's mentioned offhand on my site several times that unless it's structural, he doesn't need to see it anyway.
Okay, so I think that's just codifying what we're already doing.
Adopted. Yeah, we've already adopted that informally.
We have had a couple of problems come up in the past where somebody wants to do a slab for their first floor in the house, and they have in-floor heating, and the mesh is in contact with the ground, and which causes it to eventually rust out. Also, with the in-floor heating, there was a conflict between the in-floor heat and the mesh itself, that they were in touch with each other, but this isn't part of our inspection. So I'm somewhat reluctant because we're doing a lot more in-floor heat now.
Weren't we just saying earlier that everything that could be inspected doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily right that it should be, right? We can't guarantee that a house is going to be built perfectly, just safe enough so the occupants don't, right?
Yeah, that's a major fix though, a poured in floor heat.
And you got to speak to Ann's question that the tubing should be inspected under a mechanical inspection. And then again, that would be a partial. So any tubing would be inspected before concrete's poured.
As the office side of this, we have people pull mechanical permits for the radiant floor heating. They do call it as a inspection under the mechanical permit. So it is something that is inspected. Usually the issue that Paul's referencing is not that it's contacting the wire weld, it's that they have the sharp edges at the end of the wire weld contacting the PEX tubing. And what we've run into is there was 2 inspections and someone did not notice that they had passed part of their one inspection related to their foundation, but failed the radiant floor mechanical inspection and went ahead.
So they went ahead and poured it. So that's a done deal. There's not much we can do about that. And Cam, your point about catching it all, You can't catch it all. We can do the best we can.
Installation though. I mean, that's a major installation. It's not like a minor.
It gets done, Hope. It gets done as part of the mechanical inspection.
Okay, then, yeah.
So I tend to agree that flat work inspection, we don't do now and we don't want to do it in the future.
Mm.
Charlie,
Anything
did
else?
Charlie have something?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Luke, what you got? All kinds of good stuff.
I mean, I have a lot, so
Good.
I don't know that I could really go through it all reasonably. I mean, there's certain just places where, you know, in the old resolution, we had said that this section is going to be renumbered as to this section, and we decided there was no reason for that. So there's lots of little funny things like that.
Well, every section is going to have to be renumbered in accordance with the 2018 building code. Whether we remove that particular section or add to it or modify it.
Right. Yeah, we just, for some reason, we were saying that we were going to renumber parts of it, and there was no reason that we could see for that before.
Okay.
And it sounds like that's something Dan Weed has experience with. Like when he's writing it, he'll clean all that up. I mean, that was what was daunting to me, is we did have all those little, you know, little tiny changes just to make alignment, right? And then, you know, if Dan has drafted a resolution in the past for Clear Creek, I'm sure he's encountered that. And
Yes.
and he'll probably work off our existing as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can anybody think of anything else that we want to insist on?
Radon readiness. We should at least consider it. Radon resistant foundation. I mean, pretty much the majority of jurisdictions in Colorado have adopted that. And
It's Appendix F, right?
yeah. And we have high radon here, and boy, there's no one is more pissed than a homeowner who gets a high radon test after they've built a brand new house without a
Yes.
radon resistant foundation.
Fairly cheap measure to implement, or at least, yeah, to put in before other systems.
So we talked, I think I recall, we talked about just going ahead and adopting Appendix F.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I did have one exception, I think, in Appendix F that we talked about, I guess, which is talking about adding an option for spray foam vapor barrier and striking out AF 103.5.1, whatever that is. So I think that seemed pretty reasonable.
Okay,
Ethan,
so what was that?
You guys do that, right? Yeah.
What was that number again? Luke?
AF 103.5.1. I had a note that we would strike that out.
Okay.
And I think that's to allow for spray foam as the vapor barrier.
As opposed to like a 6 mil or better, or in addition to.
Yeah, 11 or 20 mil, something like that.
I think right now, as it stands, it's a minimum of 6 mil.
For radon? Oh,
I
okay.
think so.
I had forgotten about that, Cam. What else?
Let's see, I think the best thing I could do would be to just clean up what I've got here and email it to everybody.
Be great.
Just because I could spend a long time going through each one of these, and some of it's a little ugly. So without typing it all, I think most of it's legible enough. So
That would be awesome, Luke.
That
Yeah.
would be awesome.
and then maybe that's discussion for next time before we
Okay.
send it off.
Okay. Do we want to talk about when we get together again next?
Could I just plant the seed? I don't want to I don't want to get in the weeds or anything like that. I just want to plant a seed. I said something about it just a little earlier. And we, as staff, we've been just talking about, we'd like the Board of Review to consider some kind of proof of certification in order to be able to pull a building permit, whether it's a self-build or a contractor. ICC offers, a series of certifications, whether it be general contractor certification or something. I don't think it would be overly onerous at all for the regular local contractors, but it would create a certain level of expertise and set the stage for expectation for self-builds that we are starting to get so many of, and we're having a hard time managing in the office. So I certainly don't want to do anything more than just plant a seed and ask the board to consider thinking about that.
I support you 100%. There should be some kind of something people have to do before they continue building, especially for other people. I'm not even talking about home builds. I'm talking about contractors in the community. And most of these guys here have, they work in other counties where they are required. Who has contractor's license here in Colorado?
Regional Building Department. And I think Summit County does. I know Eagle County does not.
I think
But there are a number of counties that do this. Some of them have their own tests. Some of them say, well, you need to pass the ICC test.
And could you send a link for that, or some reference to what the process and or requirement would be through the ICC or any equivalent?
Probation period, for the next year, you have a year to pass this exam, or whatever, I would say 6 months, but.
We're thinking in terms of passing the exam before you get registered with us.
And John just did some preliminary looking at cost, and I think we're looking in the ballpark of like $120 cost. So I mean, it's not like thousands of dollars, but I do think that we'd be happy to send over a link to the different programs that I think there's 3 different ones, and there's actually a whole array of different certifications that you could hold for different types of construction. But I'm happy to send that information over and have you take a look at it and see, get some feedback.
Anne references, I did look into it. She's right about $120. Also, the time barrier is pretty low. The ICC is now administering a lot of these tests via computer. And so you're able to take them almost any time and from basically any location. We actually had someone take the test while they were on a vacation in Alaska. And they, as a homeowner build, turned in their certification. So their barrier on time is also relatively low.
Yeah, we think that having everybody have some degree of certification in effect would be very helpful to staff. One of the other things that we've run into is contractors that are registered that operate poorly. And if we're going to register our contractors, I think we probably need to have some methodology by which we unregister them.
And on that too, I just want to give, we started this idea, we've just been so incredibly busy, but hopefully we will launch this at the beginning of the year, just like we have a lot of other things that we're trying to get out at the beginning of the year. And that is a PSA to property owners to kind of set the example of, what kind of things as a property owner you should be asking and looking at when you go to hire a contractor. Unfortunately, like Paul said, we are kind of seeing a record year of people being in situations that are less than good. We've had a lot of unfortunate situations. I think there are so many people looking for contractors, and a lot of our very good, amazing contractors are already committed. And so the industry has become a bit flush with people taking advantage of an opportunity that may not be as qualified as so many of our great local resources. And so we have started kind of a PSA and a flyer to try to inform the general public about what kind of things you should see from the contracting world. Again, we have people coming in and saying they didn't sign a contract. They come in, they said there was never a budget. They come in, the things we hear sometimes are kind of crazy. And so we're just trying to kind of educate the public too of the kind of normal things that they would expect from, what we see all the time from local contracts offering the public, but there is unfortunately a lot of other kind of practices happening. So we're trying to kind of set the bar of what the public should expect.
Yeah, we want to look to reduce some of our sleaziness.
I have to say, the only reason people will get a contractor's license or a certification is if there's a consequence. And we don't have a consequence in Lake County, except unless you do good and sign, and register yourself, you can get your name pulled off, but you're not required to register yourself here to be a contractor. And so when there's no consequence, there's no incentive to do the right thing. We don't really have a consequence in Lake County for contractors unless they voluntarily register themselves, and then you can take them off of that list.
Well, we won't issue a building permit unless they're registered.
That doesn't stop a contractor from being hired from a homeowner.
Well, and yeah, we can't catch all of those constructions that don't get building permits either.
Right, but if it's known in Lake County that if you're a contractor, you have to have a contractor's license, that's something solid a homeowner can say. But right now, a homeowner can say, you know what, Joe Blow, I'm going to hire you. Do you have a contractor's license? Well, it's not required here in Lake County. So, that's why I offer it cheaper. I don't have to pull permits. I'm not required to have a license here.
It is required here in Lake County. There's just no real enforcement mechanism, but it is required. It's part of the building resolution.
Okay.
Well, I think whatever your staff, would like to do to help, just improve people's experiences here, I'm supportive of, and,
Okay.
getting information out, doing PSAs,
I think
I'm
PSAs,
100% supportive and willing to help on that. I'm just saying homeowners are not going to they're going to look for the cheapest bid, and that dance that the contractor says, I hear it all the time.
but
Well,
that's their fault as a bad consumer, it's like.
this is part of this PSA that Ann's talking about, is that it's basically a list of what did you do to get a contract? Is he registered or licensed? Is he, did you sign a contract? Did this contract include these major points? What else, Ann?
The other things is we always recommend that they go and talk to other people that the contractors built homes for. Have you seen homes that they have built? Have you talked to their references? Have you gone and actually seen the homes? Those are, I think, all good checkpoints, because, we've had certain, and I think I can say this without naming names or even inferring somebody, but, we've had people that have come in and said, oh, well, said they were a contractor for 20 years, but they never spoke to any references. They never saw any of their builds. So there was nothing to back that information up. So, some of them are just really general things that you would think that the consumer would think to do. But because the demand and the interest in building is so great that I think they just forego certain things that are common sense. And so we just want to really highlight those, also try to just kind of raise the bar. And so that when we register, like you said, Hope, when we register people or contractors, it has more meaning to it than just give us your liability insurance and pay $50.
Everyone here just wants the best, I think, for people who are building, and we, we may not always agree on the strategies, but I'm feeling a lot of, good intentions here with this group tonight and wanting to protect people, make our processes better. So I just want to recognize that. So thanks to everybody. who's
Thank you,
contributed.
Cam. That is really true on staff's part.
Yeah.
Because we run into new circumstances every week, something that we've never run into before, because something along the lines of what a homeowner builder did or didn't do. And one of those is when they hire a contractor.
And we can't write a code. We can't code ourselves out of some of these situations. And I think that's why we need to rely on, quality people like you folks in the building department. So
I think these public service announcements are something that we can tell them. We can't make them drink it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is America. You can blow your fortune on
Yeah.
whatever you want. Not that it's good, but
All right. We're now at closing in on an hour and a half. What do you think?
should we entertain well, we want to discuss about the next meeting, and I'd suggest that we hold off till after the Christmas and holiday season, and Paul, give you time to, work with Dan Weed and, maybe look for late January, early February to reconvene. Is that amenable to everybody?
Sure.
Or unless we want to get this done by the end of the year, but I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's a nice idea, but Paul, do you think there's any chance that, Dan would get this drafted and then we could all review it and provide feedback and everything by the end of the year? It doesn't
Probably
seem
not.
like it to me.
Probably not.
Yeah.
No.
So let's just be realistic there and
All
give you
right.
all time, and I'll send out the doodle poll in January.
Okay.
And,
I do have one more topic that I need to broach. We have a recent insistence that our members of our various boards that are appointed to 3-year terms, when those 3-year terms expire, we have to advertise and ask that individual if they'd like to be reappointed. So I will be notifying you over the next week or so if any of that applies to you, any of the 5 of you.
and we would just submit a letter to the Board of County Commissioners, right? Or to you,
Yeah.
and then you share it with them.
Submit it through me.
Yeah. So just expressing our interest to remain.
One of the arguments, there's 2 valid arguments concerning this. One of them, it is fully transparent and democratic. On the other hand, it doesn't take into account the experience that a board member has gained as a board member. And this is something that we struggle with. So in all of our cases here, all of you 5 members, if any of you are expiring on December 31st, I would encourage you to submit another letter of interest. And I'll let you know hopefully by the end of this week, tomorrow, I guess.
Thanks, Paul. And Commissioner Mudge indicated as much as well in her recent email to us all. So
yeah,
on their mind as well. Unless there's anything else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn, however you want to say it.
I have
I'll
one
second that.
Sorry, just one question. Are we ever going to hire in-staff inspectors?
Inspectors are not a dime a dozen.
I know, but you can train them, and they can train, and we can hire them within our county.
Well, one of the problems is that we have a company that we contract with, and we would be asking them to find us another inspector. And I don't know that they would be, number one, be able to succeed. Number two, I really like having this professional backup as Shums Coda, because we get the benefit of the whole staff. We don't get the benefit of, I mean, there's several occasions in which I have queried Shums Coda, Steve Thomas in particular, about a circumstance that Jerry is running into. And we've got a pretty quick interpretation of what the code exactly is. So I would have to say, Hope, well, we've been advertising here for another planner for about a year now. And if you look on the county's website on all of the positions that are vacant, hiring anybody in this time is really a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I would just, and I would hope I would say that too. I think that we're struggling to be able to offer a competitive wage. And then you couple that with the inability to find housing. We are struggling to find staff. And so that, and it's not just our department, you know, I can't remember how many job openings we have, 28 or something at the county.
Okay.
And so we, you know, so that, I think that's our other part is even when we find someone, if they don't know someone or already have housing, the housing piece is so hard. We can, with the amount of the wage that we can offer. So it's just like the perfect storm.
I think because what came up in the last meeting was the turnaround time that who we outsourced to, that there were some really extreme turnaround times. And
that's the case everywhere. Actually, you know, that's not just here. That's all over the place because it's just unprecedented.
well, no, this was prior. Remember, our last meeting was over a year ago. So I think, well, I mean, but it was discussed over a year ago. So I was just wondering if we had talked about reviewing the turnaround times and stuff. And
Turnaround times of what?
That's what we talked about.
You know, I do think though, to that point, I think that we have some high hopes that we might eventually be able to do some over the counter reviews for things like decks and smaller projects that will then take off of Jerry's plate or our third party.
Right.
You know, so I think that we're hoping that within our staff to be able to eventually be able to do kind of counter reviews of some of those smaller projects that kind of bog down the work some, you know, so I think that we do have a target and a goal. You know, just as much as Paul's put me on the spot tonight, I'm going to put John on the spot. You know, I think we're hopeful that we can groom him. Like you said, you can train someone. I think we do have some hope that we may be able to do that. He showed interest in that. And so we're really hopeful that maybe we would be able to do those smaller projects eventually in-house.
Not only that, but we have also sent plans for review to Shums Coda and not given them to Jerry because we wanted somebody with a higher level of expertise on a particular project.
I got you. Okay. Yeah, it was a discussion. So, you know, it had been a while since we came back to it.
It's going to be a continuous issue for the next several years, I think.
Okay.
So did somebody move to adjourn?
Yeah, so I'll move to it. Well, let's just try it again from the beginning. So can I entertain a motion to adjourn? And then can someone second it?
Second.
Second it.
Okay. Anyone? Yeah. I don't think we have to do anything more formal beyond that, but.
Everybody say aye.
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 That's unanimous.
Thanks, you all. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Tim and John.
Thanks, Kevin.
And Ann.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Right.